January isn't always known for banger games, but that doesn't mean there aren't some sweet titles, questionable titles, fun-looking titles, and just some weird-ass-looking ones coming. So here's a list of some of the games that I'm going to be watching for in January 2025. Also, while it's downtime for many of us, what games are you playing in December? Post off in the comments. First up, it feels only fitting to start this list with Sniper Elite Resistance. There's something telling about a game that no one knew was coming being headlined by a sneaky sniper that its core character represents. It shows up to try to headshot its way into the tail end of January. A late entry, but it's not who shoots first, it's who hits the damn target. Sniper Elite Resistance is launching on January 30th for pretty much all the systems other than Switch. This is a spin-off title, and it does shift the focus from the series' mainstay, Carl, to a new operator, Harry Hawker, and introduces a storyline that unfolds alongside the actual events of the Sniper Elite 5 game. Listen, these games don't change that much, and like other titles that so often revisit the same locations and time frame, like Yakuza, you do have to put your expectations behind you for a brand new everything when you leap in. But there are few games that show the same thing can be fun the first time and the millionth time, like shooting a Nazi in the nuts from 300 yards away and watch her a high-speed bullet neuter him at near-horizon distances. So, Sniper Elite Resistance is going to drop you into the midst of the same world war, specifically Nazi-occupied France in 1944. You're going to join forces with the French resistance to take down a sinister plot that's brewing deep within enemy territory. You see, the Nazis, as Nazis do, are working on a new devastating weapon that could potentially shatter the Allied forces and give them the upper hand. And this time, as Harry Hawker, an agent of the Special Operations Executive Force, you're tasked with infiltrating that Nazi operation, gathering crucial intel, sabotaging their plans before the weapon can wreak havoc on the world. This is a new direction for the series when it comes to the protagonist, as Harry Hawker takes center stage for the first time, offering a different perspective and possibly some new changes to the franchise, at least when it comes to the narrative elements. So you'll need to use wits and cunning, as always, to stay one step ahead of the enemy and remove one head at a time. At its core, the sniping experience remains pretty much the same. You find a high location and rain down lead onto unsuspecting, or shit, who cares, maybe even suspecting bad guys. With your assortment of World War II weaponry that runs the gamut from sniper rifles to assault machine guns to explosives that are probably better and more realistically used on tanks, but net absolutely hilarious results when used on humans. As expected, you consistently have to account in factors like gravity, wind, and your character's heartbeat to ensure successful hits at distance. The X-ray cam also returns, providing you a pretty gruesome and detailed look at the devastating impact of a well-placed shot. However, sniping is not the only way that you're going to be able to play this game. It always encourages players to adopt a very stealthy approach, using shadows and distractions to get the drop on enemies, or just ghosting through it. Alternatively, you can play a more aggressive strategy, as always, taking on the enemy head-to-head with guns blazing. The game's nature requires players to think on their feet and adapt to the situations, making it impossible to really rely on one single approach, especially on the higher difficulties, or you just have insanely good patience. One of the two. I will say that no matter what way you do desire to play, Sniper Elite games have always rewarded it for the most part. One of the most significant changes, though, in Resistance is the overall mission structure. Open-ended approaches that always allows the players to choose their own path and approach. Players can select their own infiltration and extraction points, prioritize objectives, and experiment with different strategies beating the mission. I love this idea, especially being able to decide your own extraction points. Multiplayer is, of course, here a key component of the game. Resistance is going to offer you a range of modes. It's got co-op campaigns where players team up with a friend to take down the enemies, and asymmetrical PvP modes like Invasion. This is where players take on the role of an Axis sniper trying to disrupt another player's online campaign, which is not always as fun as it sounds. For those of you who prefer competitive play, you've got online multiplayer battles with up to 16 players. It makes it feel like something that pretty much anybody can jump into at any skill. You just have to adjust that difficulty level and decide the way you want to play and how it all balances out. While Sniper Elite has had its missteps in the past, there's no mistake in that. In many ways, Resistance is sort of a large-scale DLC side expansion packaged into a full title. We'll just have to see if this new character, the new way in which it can play at different times, is worth it. And I do have to say this, there's rarely a full title that even feels like a more perfect game for a sedate Sunday blasting the furs, followers, and their fuck tools. Sniper Elite Resistance is set to launch on January 30th. Of course, pre-orders are available now. They have bonus content. There's a campaign mission available for those who pre-order as well. There's a deluxe edition, which includes a season pass and its content, which hopefully turns out to be an absolute must-play and possibly a really interesting side joint. Speaking of joints, this next one, you'd have to be high as shit to not know what it is, and that's Dynasty Warriors, or in this case, Dynasty Warriors Origins. Honestly, I feel like there's been more titles in this damn series than victims of Eminem diss tracks, but if you want to roll through thousands of enemies on horseback and have a higher kill count than most world wars in a single hour's time, there are a few games that hit it like Dynasty Warriors, and Origins might actually be for you. So here's the deal with Dynasty Warriors Origins. This is the next big tactical action game from Omega Force and Tecmo, and it's dropping on January 17th. You'll be able to play it on PS5, Xbox, and PC through Steam. The story takes us back to ancient China during the legendary Three Kingdoms period. Feels like we're visiting there many times. It's pretty legendary. You play as a nameless warrior who's lost their memory, and you're thrown into epic historical battles like the Yellow Turban Rebellion. Be aware the game isn't a spin-off. I've seen people saying that prior to what the company has said, which is that the developer and the company are treating this as pretty much a main title and one they want to be more open to new players, with those changes centered and focused on bringing new people in. This includes a large overland map that's full-on adventure story mode almost, with you traveling around, meeting and greeting and later yeeting various friends and enemies in the game world in more of a roleplay section. Honestly, in games like this, it's hard not to ignore the feeling of familiarity that creeps in a bit, like Earth Defense Force games, which change by not changing much. But where Dynasty Warriors Origin seems to be taking its ideas is in a mixture of a huge number of improved upon and revisited elements of the past games, with a pretty noticeable razor focus on making sure that new players won't be sitting there wondering why just a couple guys in the game world have god swords and everybody else was given a $5 He-Man plastic sword from a friggin' yard sale. To do this, the game is augmenting what it knows best. First, 1 versus 1,000 battles, where you just tear through massive armies, has been completely changed to more like 1 versus 10,000, because it's now made for the newer machines. And sure, you still do have people on your side, and sure, fighting with them can make battles easier, but it's a game that really knows its roots well despite any other idiosyncrasies, which is showing a player single-handedly depopulating an entire land by swinging a sword through friends and foes alike, because if ancient history has proven anything, it's proven that backstabbery and betrayal are common. Admittedly, though, even with the lower numbers in the past, by the time you got 2 layers deep, it just looks like someone fell asleep and copy-pasted in Blender. But whatever. The more to kill, the better, and like prior games, your character secretes a nice layer of butter on his armor, meaning you can slip through the battlefield and right past anyone you don't want to fight, except for the occasional ones that it makes you. But it's not all button mashing, it's got strategic sides too. You'll be commanding troops, making tactical decisions, and thinking a little bit more about how to win these battles than you possibly did in the prior games. Always tracking bravery and morale throughout the fight, with brave enemies trying to take you out right away, and those POS cowards just circling around you consistently hoping someone else is going to come in and save their day. They've also made some other excellent changes. They've reintroduced the bodyguard system, peons can't disrupt combos, the charge system is back, as is weapon switching, and more importantly, back to the main character for a second, he isn't actually tied to a specific kingdom, which actually excites the hell out of me, from a story standpoint at least. But be aware that does mean one character playable throughout it all. Though you can leap into others in small sections of combat when nearby, it doesn't have a giant plethora of characters that you can pick from. Additionally, there seems to be a lot of variations now in the weapon. You can tweak one of your 9 weapon types, each have their own variations in strengths and bonuses, so that should allow some switch-ups and make sure that everybody doesn't play exactly the same game, as well as building up your budding Alzheimer's-ridden character to fit your playstyle by buying skills from trees as you gain experience. Also, thankfully, a demo exists. This was dropped around November 22nd, I think, and about 1 million people downloaded it. Actually, now that I think about it, more than 1 million people probably download different versions of malware every day. But you get my drift, and it allows for you to jump in, get a little taste of the scale and level of polish. If you're thinking about picking this up, you got a standard edition as well as a digital deluxe edition, which continues the cancer of early access, which is 3 days, plus some extras like an art book and a soundtrack. You'll also get Nameless Warrior Garb, which ties into a collab with Wolong Fallen Dynasty, which feels a bit like the next Shadow of War game collabing with friggin' Gollum, but whatever. I'm still excited to check this one out, Dynasty Warriors Origins. And another return to the favorites. Sure, it's a port. It's a Nixie's port though, and it's on top of that a top-tier Sony game, which bears its own mention, and that's Marvel Spider-Man 2. It's making its way to PC finally on January 30th. Originally developed by Insomniac Games, and it's ported to PC by the talented, well, unless this one sucks, Nixie's Software. The game comes to you with enhanced visuals, it's got ray trace reflections, ultra-wide monitor support, and customizable controls, and hopefully takes advantage of the severe overkill that PCs now have over consoles. One of the coolest things about this game is that you do get to play as both Peter and Miles. As you're swinging around the world, you can switch between them while exploring New York, and each bring their own unique style to the table. Peter's got his symbiote suit, which makes him an absolute beast with crazy tendril attacks. On the other hand, Miles has his bioelectric venom powers, and he's added some new electric tricks to the arsenal. Some missions are tailor-made for one SpiderMan, though, while others let you choose which to bring along for the ride. It's a system I can admit I wasn't in love with. Sometimes I just wanted to be a Peter, a dream of most adolescent boys. But seriously, sometimes you don't want to take that time to switch. It's odd, and it makes no sense in particular missions, but whatever, because in the end, you're able to swing across the city as two white goose shooting young men helping out ladies in need. Speaking of that, the map is bigger this time. Each area feels distinctly different, whether it's the bustling city streets or quieter neighborhoods. And when I say distinctly, I just mean when it comes to a large city. Traversing the city is a bit quicker this time, though, thanks to a new addition that's called the web wings, because apparently Spider-Man wants to have a body part from his largest natural predator. They let you glide around the map, and if you find a wind tunnel, you can zip across larger distances. That part is pretty gamified, so be aware. You'll come across more random events like crimes in progress, challenges to tackle, and all kinds of activities as you swing around. The side missions dig a bit deeper into the world, and the characters often giving you upgrades or newer suits, and that's one of the things I've always loved about the Spider-Man games, is just going around trying to collect suits in the different challenges and missions. Regardless of how you travel, though, at some point you're going to need to beat a sucker in the face. Peter's symbiote suit gives him some seriously aggressive, over-the-top moves, while Miles' continued electric abilities offer a sizable difference between the two. What would a Spider-Man game be without upgraded gadgets? You got web bombs, trip mines, and others that you can use to be creative in the fights, and there's a skill tree for both of the characters when you jump in. Now, if you're not in the mood to go full-on brawler, the game still has a ton of stealth, and it works quite well. You can sneak around, you can use the environment to take out enemies silently, and plan your approach across the level. There's also puzzles sprinkled throughout the game, some tied to the main story, and others that unlock cool extras when you solve them. Be aware, though, that some of those are specific to particular Spider-Men, which makes sense when it comes to the characters and the narrative arcs, but wasn't exactly fun when you're in the middle of swinging and you drop onto one. You just want to fix it or do it right away, and you can't. The game also brings more enemies to life that we've seen in the comic books. The boss fights are huge, they have cinematic moments and unique mechanics that make each actually feel a bit like a part of a movie. Originally, the game looked really good. Here, you're going to have improved ray tracing, better lighting, and detailed textures, making New York look better than it did already. Here on the PC, you're going to be able to go till your heart's content, and hopefully that port is good and nails it. Also, if you have a DualSense controller, that's going to have full support here. Even after you finish the game, there's plenty to do. You can jump into extra challenges, clean up side missions, and go hunting. Also, if you just want to experience it all again, there's a N+ mode. When this game originally came out and I did a review, I had some bugs. Most of them have been solidly quashed on the actual platform, and I can say that those goddamn Mary Jane levels are not ones that have been. They're still in the title. They feel a bit discordant to me, but your mileage will vary. Overall, Spider-Man 2 was a great game originally and sold insanely well. I hope to see a solid port by Nixies here. Next up, Citizen Sleeper 2. Citizen Sleeper 2 Starward Vector is the sequel to the original game from 2022. It's developed by Jump Over the Edge and published by Fellow Traveler. It's launching on January 31st for PS5, Xbox, PC, and Nintendo Switch. If you've got Game Pass, this will be there day one. In this game, in Citizen Sleeper, you take on the role of a new sleeper, which is basically a human consciousness living inside an artificial body. You're hiding out in the Starward Belt, a cluster of habitats floating in an asteroid belt. The problem is, you've rewritten your system's code to escape corporate ownership, and now things have gone south. Your body's failing, bounty hunters are after you, and you can't even remember who you used to be. It's all about survival in this dystopian world where every move feels like a fight to stay alive. But also, the reason why this game did so well originally was because the gameplay sticks to a tabletop RPG-inspired dice-based mechanic that really made it feel unique no matter what. Requirements come up, you take your dice, and you allot them to the moves and actions you want to take across the location during the day, as well as in particular places. If you want to hack that noodle station, you need to have a dice that's identical to the requirement. But if you just want to sit down and eat, you just need money. Or if you want to talk them into selling those hot-ass top ramen noodles cheaper, you just need a dice in your inventory above the requirement. It's not a bad system at all, and it works well to give you a different idea of the requirements for somewhat the same actions, one in the real world, one hacking, and one just using the money that you originally get from doing missions. Now, you're going to start here in a stolen ship, which becomes your home base. It's also, at times, a sort of confusing place, a place where you might think to yourself, what do I do? What needs to be done versus what do I just think might be cool to explore? But as you do so, you need to use those dice, and in this game, stress is a big deal. If you don't pay attention, your stress meter can burn out, damaging and lowering the dice you carry around to complete different activities. Now, along the way, you're going to build a crew of different characters, each with their own backstory and skills. They'll help you survive, make progress in the world, and show you their expertise or their loyalty, depending on the different choices and decisions you make throughout the story. As you explore, you get to take on contracts, everything from smuggling and salvaging to riskier missions that can push you closer to freedom economically, as well as just distance-wise, or deeper into problems. These jobs aren't just about earning money, though. They also shape the path forward. The game is full of decisions all over the place that impact your story, constantly having you choose between the right answer and an answer that may end up letting you live a little bit longer. It feels a bit like something like A-Team or Firefly, where each job's dangerous, where no matter what your skills are or its combination of luck, grit, and risk that you can put towards it, the result is always a possible frisk and death. It's a huge role-playing title that I like, someone who DM'd before the red box was painted to foretell the blood of the adventures it would spill, and seeing a cyberpunk one like this, but also in space, just works for me. Eternal Strands is an action-adventure game. It's coming out January 28th from Yellow Brick Games. It'll be able to be played on the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, consoles, or PC. And if you're a Game Pass subscriber, you can jump in on launch day. First, let's get the story out of the way because it's pretty generic. You play in the shoes of Bryn, a young weaver with a mission to reclaim the homeland from a group called the Enclave. The world is massive, supposedly, and built for exploration. You can climb practically anything in the game world, making the whole environment feel like a bit of a vertical playground. But no matter how much you play, just like any playground, everybody fights at some point. And here, Bryn has her magic to back her up. She wields elemental powers like fire and ice. For example, you can use the ice to freeze enemies in places or use it to cross a river, or basically drawing a line in the sand, not thinking that's enough, so you light the entire beach on fire with magical infernos to keep enemies away or just to burn open a path for you to find a new way to a location. We're just going to have to see if they can take these loose, different kinds of systems and put them all together. It looks like they have, though. I also admit that the Weaver Band, your troop of collected comrades traveling with you across the Broken Land, feels a lot like Flintlock. But luckily, Bryn doesn't feel like that. She's got a sense of slickness that I think Flintlock would have killed for. Also, she has the ability to use bits from the destruction she's caused around her to fling shit at her enemies' faces, which looks pretty good. You can also grab projectiles that are thrown her way and swing them back like a physical version of a kid, just saying, whatever I say bounces back to you, except here, words are replaced by one-ton fiery balls. In a boss fight in particular, some of these spells are going to be useful as you can use different spells to really affect the boss. For example, ice spells will freeze enemies' limbs in place. So if you're tired of having a 2-story tall son of a bitch hitting you with a club the size of a school bus, you can freeze his arm. Or if you're having trouble getting him to sit still, freeze his leg. Supposedly there are 9 colossal bosses roaming different parts of this world, but it doesn't mean that there aren't a bunch of other enemies. I would say it does compare in some ways to Shadow of the Colossus, but honestly, many of the bosses in Shadow are almost big enough that the bosses here could climb them like a human, which is fine. It's just that what we've seen in the past with other types, this reminds me a bit of a mini-me type Austin Powers situation. There's a feel to it that looks slick. For example, when you're fighting across a giant suit of armor with an abnormally braggy codpiece that decided to thunderstep through the campground, everything about it seems slicker. It seems smoother. It seems like they've dialed in the movement, and then you climb up on its head and stab its off switch. The only issue this game could have is one of the things the developers have said is they wanted the game world to feel like it reacts to. For example, fire spreads around where it starts naturally and cold can freeze items. I need hands-on to see just how much this will be true, but fire propagation is about as old as time, and yet for some reason every developer seems to crow about it like it hasn't been possible for ages. But we'll just have to see how it all comes together when Eternal Strands tries to rope us in come the end of January. And surprise, surprise, another game coming at the end of January. Well, in this case, a DLC, which is Atomic Heart Enchantment Under the Sea, which marks the third major DLC expansion for this dystopian first-person shooter I ended up really liking on review. Developed by Mundfish and published by Focus Interactive. It's set to release on January 28th. The DLC will be available across all the major platforms. This is a different one. The original Atomic Heart launched in February 2023. It was set in an alternative 1950s Soviet Union where technological advancements had led to the creation of a utopian society powered by robots. Basically a fiction ripe for just really good stuff to happen to everybody. Enter in Major P3, a soldier tasked with investigating Facility 3826 after its robots suspiciously began to rebel against humanity. A first-person game that, hey, was a bit clunkier than others, but something about its combat, retro-futuristic visuals, dark humor, and Lord Palpatine levels of sucking up items in the environment that I love. Enchantment of the Sea is the third of the DLCs releasing for Atomic Heart, and I'm actually excited for this one because the first two DLCs, for example, Annihilation Instinct and Trapped in Limbo, actually expanded the entire world of Atomic Heart in some pretty interesting ways. Annihilation Instinct introduced new enemies and weapons while taking players deeper into the facility's lore, and it focused on just how fucked up the entire situation had been until then. Trapped in Limbo dived into the surreal and fragmented memories of Major P3, the main character, with a bit of experimentation in the gameplay elements and some fairly unsettling environments, but you couldn't say they didn't show you new and unique places. Players are going to venture into Neptune Research Center. This is an underwater section of the Facility 3826 where things have continued to go catastrophically awesome. P3 has to get his O2 because throughout this expansion, you are unraveling the mysteries of the facility's deep sea experiments. I love this idea. Sure, it's got a bit of BioShock in it, and I'm fine with that. Revisiting familiar areas such as the floating city as well, now under the complete control of the rogue AI. I just can't wait to explore it. Also, when it comes to expansions in Atomic Heart, they've consistently introduced new tools and abilities for the character. In Neptune, Atomic Heart throws you a bone in the shape of a huge hammer here called Thunderclap, a hammer that delivers DPS dumps to enemies' domes, and area of attack amped up electrical arcs that can bring down groups of enemies or stun the heavily armored ones. You can also get the KM4, which is a customizable double-barrel shotgun designed for maximum crowd damage, or it's just really fun to shoot one person in the face with both barrels. There's also two new glove abilities. You have Blaze, which allows players to unleash blazes, I guess, and a whip, a grappling tool that lets players pull enemies towards them or get to hard reach locations. And I have to admit, this seems like a misnaming opportunity. You could have just said Tsunami, Riptide, Abyss, and Sticky-Ass Squid Arm, but whatever. It makes you wonder what exactly they have in mind if all these are used in combination for a sequel, for an Atomic Heart 2. What it might deliver as these ideas all feel a bit like test beds for future games in a world that feels like the past was frozen, the present is futuristic, and has come back to say, maybe you shouldn't mess with technology at all. Scratch that, except for that horny-ass vending machine. We do need those ASAP. Depending on how you want to leap into the game and the DLC, you can do the Atomic Pass, and it bundles all 4 planned DLCs, which offers you an easy way to jump in. Enchanted Under the Sea does look a pretty damned cool BioShock-inspired DLC for a game that started with one of the most BioShock Infinite-esque beginnings you could ask for. And despite the issues I had, I actually generally loved it. January 28th, this thing is either gonna sink or swim. Also, that brings us to our honorable mentions from the Game Awards. We got an announcement for Final Fantasy Rebirth on the PC, January 23rd. We can finally get that blurriness from the PS5 version away. Nothing like having surgery so your glaucoma goes away or smoking a ton of pot. Either one, we're going to be able to play this on the PC. My hope is that it not only does what the original PC version did for the prior game, but also improves everything upon it. We'll just have to see. And I can't wait to. I'm actually excited for a lot of these January games, and February is going to be nuts. If you want to join the rest of us crazies, you can come to the Discord. It helps out the channel, especially with a bunch of personal losses this year and just crap I don't even want to get into. It's been a super helpful time to talk to you guys, have everybody jumping in there, do some role-playing games, some tabletop games, talk about games, movies, what have you, and get some Inside Baseball, where I cover a bunch about what's going on in the industry behind the scenes with people in the Discord. It is a fantastic spot to be.